Mr. President, you have been accused of grabbing too much power. Are you guilty of violating the Constitution? Has the presidency grown beyond the legal limits?
A full year before the Constitutional Convention, John Jay, writing to George Washington, asked, "Should we have a king?" The Shays' Rebellion pointed out to our forefathers the need for a new order, an order which would assure to the victor a free nation. An order, fought for and revolution, which would continue the virtues of the American experiment. Would the young nation turn back to its predecessor for political guidance? Ultimately, the Constitutional Convention would answer with a resounding no. Monarchy posed an equal risk. Ultimate power should not, and cannot reside in the hands of one man. In this the framers found agreement. So it is also true today, despite the aggrandizement of the office. The President of the United States is not the most powerful. I am not guilty as charged.
Explain yourself.
Granted, the crisis of war has brought great power to the office of President. No other president recognized this as did Franklin Roosevelt. He fought both the Great Depression and World War II with equal force and commitment. In each, Roosevelt flexed presidential muscle. Truman suggested that the office of president looked more powerful from the outside than really was true on the inside. Nevertheless, Truman was able to assert great power in his fight to contain communism. Warlike conditions throughout much of our history have blurred the president's true power from his imagined power. The traditions, expectations, and prestige of the office have grown consistently over time. The president's ability to politic and persuade have created an illusion of great power. It is an imagined power. Past presidential success combined with the might of our nation should not be confused with available presidential power. The imagined presidency underestimates the numerous limitations that the office is subordinate to, as well as the essential character and political skill which is a prerequisite for an effective president. The real office of president could be described more as a pitiful, helpless giant than as the most powerful office in the world. The difference between what some of us imagine the presidency to be and what it really is often leads to disappointment. The president's potential for power remains great. Yet ever-present limitations deny for most presidents true and absolute power. One such limitation can be found in what the president is permitted to do. The president is restrained by a government of laws. These laws take shape in our Constitution, legislative statutes, court decisions, and even international law. The Constitution clearly created an executive office of limited power. The framers saw the president as a mere administrator of power. He was not to be the source of great strength. Congress, throughout its history, intentioned to be the most powerful branch, has severely limited presidents. Presidential patronage was limited by the Pendleton Act of 1883. Both Truman and Kennedy were severely limited by an unwieldy Congress. Perhaps its greatest response to constitutional challenge came when Congress attempted to respond to Nixon's imperial presidency. In 1974, the War Powers Act and the Budget Reform Act were both passed in direct retaliation toward the presidency gone beyond permissibility. Furthermore, the Supreme Court has often led in policy areas both limiting and overshadowing presidential power. One could cite the court's involvement in the cause of slavery, relief efforts of the New Deal, settling matters of national security during the Vietnam War, and limiting the traditional power of executive privilege. International law as well hinders presidential foreign policy maneuvers often imagined to be without restraint. We are a nation of law, not of men. The presidency is not permitted to transcend this basic axiom. Another limitation upon presidential power can be found in the limitation of resources. The president is limited when it comes to money, manpower, time, and credibility. Congress holds the power of the purse. Public pressure and growing deficits have forced the scaling down of the federal bureaucracy. Increased expectations and an ever-growing list of responsibilities, when combined with a constitutional term limit, severely impose upon a president's imagined power. Furthermore, the media barrage has cramped presidential image-making, limiting the myth of the presidency. This ultimately leads to a credibility constraint, a constraint which has handicapped our current president. Limited resources deny the president real power. A final and serious limitation on presidential power can be found in previous commitments. These commitments may have come from national principles, or party platforms, perhaps previous presidents or from decisions made by previous administrations. Even past statements by the president himself can severely limit a president's power. Imagine the tremendous burden Roosevelt's New Deal and Truman's policy of containment have put upon 20th century presidents. These commitments, imagined to be signposts of power, have exacted a challenge to a president's real power. The president as charged is not guilty. As President Truman noted, the presidency of the United States of America has become the greatest and most important office in the history of the world. Yet, as we have seen, not the most powerful. Although considered at a time of crisis, a king we did not want. Presidential power has grown and our expectations of the office grown even more. Yet greatness and power should not be confused. That which is imagined should not be confused with that which is real. As Alistair Cook stated, all presidents start out pretending to run a crusade, but after a couple of years they find they are running something much less heroic, much more intractable, namely, the presidency. The office of president is not the most powerful. Can I ask why you are interested?
Just curious. By the way, are you running in 2012?